Welcome to the latest episode of Five on the Floor on the Five Reasons Sports Network. Thanks for joining us on your favorite podcast app on Apple Podcasts, on Android, Spotify, or the Five Reasons YouTube channel. Make sure you subscribe to Off the Floor. That's our Discord server. You never know what's going to go on there. There was just like a draft preview that our guy Adele just did on there. That's on the Stage channel. You don't get that stuff anywhere else. You also get access to 10 other channels, including our transaction channel, our host updates channel, where you can see Greg and Alex argue with each other, all kinds of other great stuff there. It never stops unless you want to mute it. $2.99 per month. Go to the link here in the description. You will bypass the Apple upcharge, click all the way through, pay the $2.99, and you're in. You can cancel at any time. That's Off the Floor. Also, check out the great sponsors of the Five Reasons Sports Network. I got to get this guy on Off the Floor. Eric Rubenstein. You can find him at ericrubenstein.com or call him at 877-829-ERIC. That's 877-829-ERIC. Eric Rubenstein is your personal injury attorney. He's also the guy to make sure that you call if you have a car accident. You have a car accident, reach out to Eric right away. He'll jump right on it. Based down here in South Florida, grew up in Lauderhill, Broward County, went to St. Thomas University, magna cum laude, smart guy, funny guy. Follow his Instagram, attorney Rubenstein, and you'll see everywhere that he's hanging out. He knows Miami. He also knows the court system down here, and he'll get you the money that you deserve. That's the most important thing. Eric Rubenstein, 877-829-ERIC. And now, today's episode.
Down the Biscayne. Yeah. Five on the floor, ride for my dogs. Where here's the thing, you can check the score. Hustle hard, couple scars, wearing bubble frogs. Just like Butler said, you in trouble, y'all. Kept the floor playing, got it all banned. Y'all seen the block, stop with one hand. And Pat we trust.
You sound scared.
It's about have the guts, we're here to bring the heat. Y'all can hang it up.
Welcome to Five on the Floor, a daily insider show on the Miami Heat and the NBA, featuring Ethan Skolnick, Greg Sylvander, Alex Toledo, Brady Hawk, and others from the Five Reasons Sports Network. Also, make sure to subscribe to Off the Floor for the most heat anywhere.
All right, welcome back to Five on the Floor. Here's today's floor plan. I'm Ethan Skolnick. You can follow me at Ethan J. Skolnick and at Five Reasons Sports. I got Greg Sylvander. You can follow him at Greg Sylvander. Miami Heat are under 500. They are in New York as we speak. They're preparing to play the lottery-bound Brooklyn Nets on Saturday. Jimmy Butler was in New York today, but not with the Heat. This was a pre-planned thing because he thought he was going to be in New York. Essentially, he served as a barista for Big Face Coffee up there. But he was not with the team. The team didn't want him with them. That's why they told him basically stay home, but it didn't mean he had to stay home. It meant he could go where he wanted, but you can go wherever you want, you just can't be with us. And so that's pretty much what has played out at this time. We'll wait to see what happens. Once the Heat get back, they'll get back very late. Most likely they'll fly back from Brooklyn late Saturday night, early Sunday morning, have the day to rest on Sunday. I'm not anticipating that they practice. And so probably we'll find out late on Sunday or probably even on Monday whether or not they had a conversation with Jimmy about coming back since he's still under contract, whether he's going to play in that game against Orlando or whether there's going to be further shenanigans both ways. And ultimately, you're going to end up with another suspension. We know that the Heat don't want to send him home and pay him for nothing. We also know that Jimmy Butler wants out. He wants this to happen relatively quickly. So that's what Greg Sylvander and I are going to talk about today. Again, you can follow him at Greg Sylvander. You can follow me at Ethan J. Skolnick and Five Reasons Sports. And there's been so much talk about this Phoenix situation. And that is because that's where Jimmy wants to go. And it seems pretty clear now that that's what this has been about from the beginning. If you trace social media activity and all kinds of other things going all the way back to around December 7th when the Phoenix Suns were in town to play the Miami Heat, all of a sudden after that, a situation that we knew was kind of hanging out there. It's not like this is something new. But we knew, Greg, that this was going to be a story of the season. We did many podcasts about it. How was Jimmy going to react to not getting an extension? But it seemed like it was kind of okay. Like there wasn't anything. The pot was not totally boiling at that stage. It was just kind of simmering. It was down there. Then Phoenix was in town. It seems that someone made it clear to Jimmy and his camp that they would extend him at the max, whereas the Heat would not, at least at this time, right? And ever since then, Jimmy with orange hair, orange shoes, the whole thing has just gone completely downhill. But of course, the problem is Jimmy doesn't control this situation. I mean, neither do the Heat. Phoenix does not have assets. They have a contract in Bradley Beal that nobody really seems to want because of the length of it. Not that he's a bad player, but he's a bad fit there. And he has a no trade clause. And so a couple factors. One, a team has to want Bradley Beal. And two, he has to want to go there because he has a no trade that he could really, he can just hang with that thing. Now, his agent, Mark Bartelstein, doing the due diligence. Now, well, I would say he's doing what he's supposed to be doing. He's basically saying Bradley Beal's not going to just waive it. He's basically shooting down all the reports. But also, Bartelstein's son works for the Suns in the front office. And you would think maybe that there might be a little bit of a lean there at some point if Beal is all that's standing in the way of a trade. But to this point, the one team that Jimmy Butler knows will extend him, Nat Ishbia, the owner, will definitely extend him. The one team he knows will extend him does not have the pieces and does not have the flexibility, in part because of the no trade clause that they inherited when they acquired Bradley Beal, the no trade clause that the Heat did not want a summer and a half ago. There's not a lot of movement here. And so you and I are both hearing, and I know Keith Smith has heard it, that there are teams around the league that are looking to make trades. They have like supporting players. They're looking to move one way or the other, but they're held up because those players on the other side of the trade, potential trade, maybe end up in this Jimmy Butler deal. So everybody's waiting on this thing, including Jimmy. The Heat are waiting for specific things. And Brian Windhorst hit this today. They don't want long-term contracts. They want multi-positional players. Sounds like they want kind of some wing size. That's something we've talked about a little bit. And they don't want to get themselves more in financial difficulty here going forward in terms of flexibility. And they also would like to have picks. I mean, if they can get picks in this deal. So that's where we're at. And where we're at is kind of a stalemate because of the Phoenix problem. So, Greg, you did a list of teams that might want to rent Jimmy Butler, with the understanding that these teams likely wouldn't give up as much because they don't necessarily consider him to be part of their long-term future. Let's start with your first team.
Mark J. Spears, who is a respected individual throughout the media landscape, mentioned this team was also not on Jimmy's list, that essentially Jimmy is in a place where it's anywhere but Miami or the Memphis Grizzlies. And when you look at the Western Conference, they're 29-15 as we do this pod. They could likely get him and not give up any of their very best players. And if there had to be a parallel to what Toronto did with Kawhi in the league right now, it's probably this Memphis situation. Maybe it's a bit more of a stretch because Kawhi, I don't know. I guess Jimmy at the height of his powers was as good as Kawhi, but it just felt like that was a little bit more of an open-minded scenario because you hear so much more about Jimmy not wanting to go to Memphis. I don't know if that sways them away, but that's the first team that has the contracts. They actually could put together a package that has players that I think Miami would find useful, like as much as we can get upset about having to root for Marcus Smart because of past issues. He kind of could fit next to Tyler in ways if that was a player that they got back. Kennard's a shooter. Brandon Clark is a useful type player. These are just some of the names I'm throwing out there. Obviously, it could be some variation of that because as we talk about this, I think it's important to remember when we think about like these teams that could come out of nowhere and get involved, they're probably getting involved in a 4 or 5 teamer. So it's a big one. And those are complicated. And for a team to just kind of Hail Mary inject themselves into that process, it's not always so easy. So, but I preface that by saying Memphis makes the most sense to me. Like when you look at the contracts, it is the team like with Morant and Bane and Jaren Jackson, but Memphis has a unique situation where, and this is what ruins it for the partnership is that they're looking to shed these guys like Marcus Smart, like a Brandon Clark, and get them off the books so that they can extend Jaren Jackson Jr. and it can still be like a financial situation they can afford. So they're not looking to extend Jimmy Butler on top of that. This is like kind of their way of shedding salary long-term by taking Jimmy just for this year with the like basic understanding that he would opt out and try to go elsewhere. Now he could opt in and make that ugly also, but that was the one scenario that feels and I have a couple others that we'll get to, but I'm interested in your thoughts on Memphis because he's so adamant about not going there. But if you thought this was about winning, It wouldn't be Phoenix, who's a game above 500. So they're a
Mhm.
little better than Miami, but that's basically the same kind of situation. It would be a situation like Memphis, right?
They're not even in the play-in right now. I mean, the Heat, because of the nature of their conference, are currently in the 9 spot. Actually, they are. I'm sorry. They just snuck in there. They're a half game ahead. They're in the 10 spot. So they would have to win 2 road play-in games simply to make the playoffs. They are, I guess, 2.5 behind the 6th seed. So I guess the argument could be made they're not that far out from that. But they're also just a game and a half ahead of the Spurs, who are currently 12th. So they're not in a comfortable position, and they just made a trade for Nick Richards. He's looked pretty good since they got him, or at least more functional than the other centers that they have. They traded the 2031, this coveted pick, this sanctified pick. They traded for 3 other lesser first round picks. They'll be the lesser of 2 Utah held picks. Some of them came from other teams, but Utah held picks in 25, 27, 29. So basically, they've split up they had this gorgeous pizza pie, and they've got 3 pretty decent slices now. And so essentially, they're going to try to move those picks to facilitate a trade. But they don't have, again, they don't seem to have a well balanced roster. Now, I think the argument would be made is, well, you add Jimmy there, they need a perimeter defender, a wing defender. I think they're a little confused about what Jimmy's been in Miami the past couple of years.
Yeah.
Jimmy has not been asked, and I know that his friend went at me on Twitter about this, but he has not been asked to be the primary defender most of the time against the best wings or guards in the league. He has not. He's done it occasionally for short periods of time, and at the end of games, sometimes he's taken that assignment. But it's pretty much been Haywood Highsmith or Bam Adebayo who've taken the majority of those assignments over the past 2 to 3 years. So I guess if you want somebody who's a better defender than Booker, okay, a better defender than Beal, okay, but it seems to me more like you would want Jimmy for the facilitating, the toughness, the ability to get to the line, more so than I think he's really going to help them on defense. But we'll see. You mentioned Memphis, and I think the reason that you every few days you hear from some other reporter that he doesn't want to go to Memphis is because this is the most plausible scenario. So I view Memphis as like the biggest roadblock to him getting where he wants, which is Phoenix. Because I can see the Heat being potentially interested in what Memphis could offer here. And the guy that I would target is Jalen Wells, um, who
I
is
didn't
their
even
second round.
mention him when I was talking about names from them, but yeah.
Well, and that came up today, and that's you look at the types of players that I think they should be adding if they can't get a star level player, or they can't get, or they don't want Levine's money going forward, or they don't want to pay, let's say Ingram, right? Or Ingram's not available, or let's say Kuminga, who doesn't look like Golden State's moving now. They don't seem interested at all in any of this. Uh, then if you're not going to get that, like I want playable upside wings who you can put next to Tyler. Like that's what I think makes the most sense now. Like this idea of getting a true point guard, unless you get an elite guy, let's not make that mistake again. Okay, like this not going to work. I think you want Tyler to be your shortest player on the floor at 6'4", 6'5". And I think if you can get another guy who's 6'4", 6'5", or taller to play the wing spot next to him, is a pretty decent shooter who has a defensive mindset, who can take some of those tougher assignments. So I look at a guy like, if I was looking at Phoenix, Ryan Dunn interests me. Jalen
Phoenix just
Wells
can't aggregate players, so that's the issue, is that they can't put Dunn and Beal in a deal
and be
right
on the
now.
same deal right
Yeah.
now. Right, there is ways to do it, but right now they can't. There's other things that would have to be accomplished here. But when I look at what they need players that are I think younger, 27 or younger. Okay, can grow with this core, more positional size, more wing positional flexibility. Um, people say, well, they'll play Jalen Wells at the 4, but you know what I mean. I think they need more of those players to play in the backcourt with Tyler. And so I look at Phoenix as a very interesting option, but he keeps poisoning it, or various reporters who are expressing his viewpoint keep poisoning it. And I just wonder, if you're Memphis, do you want to deal with that headache? Because Taylor Jenkins is not Spo, okay? And he's already had enough issues with Ja over time. I think just if Jimmy was cared about winning, I think this is a top 2 or 3 situation he could find. They're already third in the West. They've rebounded from everything that happened last year without Ja. They're 29-15. They're an excellent home team. I think they would embrace Jimmy in that market. Absolutely. There's a certain against authority type attitude. The grind city and all, like they like the kind of the idea that nobody believes in them and all that. Jimmy would fit in just fine, I think, with that group. I absolutely believe that. But he doesn't want to go there. You're not getting additional advertising opportunities playing in Memphis. And he knows exactly what you said at the very beginning here. They're not going to extend him. They're
That's
not
the
going to
big
extend him.
issue.
So right. So this isn't one of those, like, we might have a couple on your list that are like rent with a chance to buy, right? Like rent with a
Mhm.
chance to own. This is not that deal. This would be just he'd be in and out of Memphis like Kawhi was in and out of Toronto, and I think even more so because with Kawhi there was a chance he was going to stay there, particularly after he won a championship. I don't think there's any chance that Jimmy would stay in Memphis because again, I don't think there's any circumstance in which they would pay him. So I think the likelihood of it is probably greater than some of these other ones, but I just wonder, will the Grizzlies really go all in on this and say, all right, you know what? He's not going to want to be here. He may not report. Like, do you want to deal with all? They've dealt with this stuff before. I remember Iverson going to Memphis like not the same front office, but
Mhm.
there's a history here, and I just wonder if they're going to want to deal with it.
I agree. And that's why, like, as I go to the next team, and we'll get through this team quickly, the Clippers are another one that, like, if you just look at the math and they wanted to deal directly with Miami, we're obviously not expecting this to be a 2-team deal. We wish it could be that simple, but it probably won't. But if you just look at the salaries they're working with, they have an expiring Bones Highland. They have Norman Powell, who makes upwards of $20 million. Derek Jones Jr. is on a longer deal at around $9.5 million, but that's like the kind of deal that actually, I think if you got that back, or maybe it ends up on a third team, something like that. But Derek Jones Jr. has been in the program before. You've seen them circle back to guys. I don't think that number is egregious for him. So maybe they would be, open-minded to that. And then PJ Tucker's salary just gets thrown in there. Like, and again, I'm just crafting something financially. This is like probably the level of offer that they've likely received and said hell no to. But like the Clippers could try to, because remember, Kawhi's first call when he was trying to figure out what he was going to do in free agency, as far as I understand, it was Jimmy Butler. It was not Paul George initially.
Right.
And Jimmy had other plans to go to Miami. If they were to kind of revisit that scenario, the Clippers have the contracts to get something done. Do they have the draft picks? And they also have an owner that's known to spend. So who knows if maybe in a last ditch effort to try to figure something out in this Kawhi build, they try to do something with Jimmy. This is just another team that, again, none of this is sourced. I want to reiterate that. It's just me looking at the contracts and figuring out how they could get involved. They're not over the second apron, so like they can aggregate some of these salaries. So there's ways to make it, but to me, it doesn't make enough sense to me to really add credence to it other than financially it's possible.
Financially, it's possible. Jimmy also has a house in San Diego, so you're talking about 2 hours down the road. And you mentioned not just Kawhi, but he has a relationship off the court with Harden, which we've talked about before.
That's true.
So
I didn't consider that. Maybe they're a bigger threat than we've,
And they're all in the same age timeline, and they all have injury histories of some sort, particularly Kawhi and Jimmy. And it's one of those things that, like you said, it's kind of you throw one last thing at the wall. Also, like you mentioned, these pieces don't all have to come to Miami. There could be multiple team trades, and so you could be getting this from one team or this from another team. I think Norm Powell's been too good for them to move him. Honestly, that's been my issue with this, is that Powell's name always gets thrown into this, but like he's a borderline all-star this year. He's been great. I mean, if you're the Heat, you'd love to get Norm Powell on your roster, I think. I mean, they've been interested in him before, to my understanding. So, but that would be the kind of the question, is like, who's headlining this thing? Is there a young piece with the Clippers that you could get? Would that probably have to come from somewhere else? Because it sounds like I don't think you'd want to touch Bones Highland beyond, whatever
he's just
the
an
length of his
expiring
contract.
$9 million.
Right. Yeah, that's not. I mean, that's a former first round pick that really hasn't panned out and had some issues in Denver. So I don't. I think it's hard to see it from the Heat's perspective. I could see, but for the reasons we mentioned here, Kawhi, Harden, the house in San Diego, and an owner who will spend, an owner who will spend, that may be attractive to him. Of course, you're going to pay the state tax in California, which nobody ever takes into consideration. But it's one to look at. I think that the Memphis thing is potentially cleaner, but it is one to look at. And we talked about the Clippers as a dark horse of this when all of this started. In fact, these were Alex and I identified like 10 teams like before this all got nasty.
Yeah.
And the Clippers and Memphis, I think, were our two dark horses, like the ones we talked about towards the end of the podcast, what we said were possibilities. All right, on the other side of this, we're gonna get to the other teams here that could be potential. Let's try Jimmy for a couple months and see how it goes. Clippers culture. I don't even know what Clippers culture is, but Ty Lue, I know our guy George Sedano is a big Ty Lue fan, and he basically says he calls Ty Lue sort of the Spoelstra of the West. Now, Eric has had his issues with Jimmy now. And of course, Ty and Eric coached together on that Olympic team. It wasn't just Kerr. Ty Lue was one of the assistants there. So they've gotten to know each other a lot better, too. But Ty's never been afraid to take somebody on. He coached LeBron to a championship. So I think there may be an openness to this on their end. But are the Heat going to get anything to make that kind of a deal worthwhile? All right, let's talk first about, what's worthwhile? Fixing the leaks in your house, your place of business, because you don't want to get worse. We know if you live in downtown Lauderdale, man, like it's like a flood from an inch of rain. So check it out. Water Cleanup of Florida. They're actually based in Boca Raton, but they service the entire Tri-County area. They do the preventative maintenance, the leak detection, the damage assessment, cover you every step of the way. Michael Robert and his team, they've got more than 100 5-star reviews on Google. This is your one-stop water and mold cleanup shop. Water Cleanup of Florida, WCUFL.com. That's how you find them. WCU, Water Cleanup Florida, WCUFL.com. If you've got the schmutz,
They got the guts.
all right, give me number 3.
So this one is just like, because if there's any team, and I should have, I guess, qualified all this by saying I didn't really look east, although like there's ways that Milwaukee could get under the second apron and then be able to do a deal directly with Miami. Like, I don't really see them sending him to a team in the East, but maybe I'll be proven wrong with that. Because there's also ways to make money work with Chicago. But again, I'm throwing these names in there, but I didn't do deep research there. But for me, the Denver Nuggets, like, if he doesn't want to go to Denver, like there's been no indication of him that being a preferred destination or whatever. But you go there with Joker, Russ is out there. They won a championship recently. I don't know how you don't go there for a few months and buy in to try to get one, and then you just see what happens. Unfortunately, I don't think the Heat are interested at all in Michael Porter Jr. at $35 to $40 million over the course of the next 3 seasons as that salary goes up. So I don't know, maybe he has to go to a third team, but that would be the other dark horse that just, I would think if they're trying to get a leg up in the Western Conference, like this is a way of them bringing a player from the East into that situation and then just try to go and get one last run with this group before you have to retool around Joker. So that was the other one that I had on the list. But again, there's been no connection there. It doesn't seem like Denver's necessarily motivated to make something like that happen right off the bat. And inevitably, because Aaron Gordon and Christian Braun kill the Heat all the time, maybe they'd be interested in those guys, because guys who kill the Heat tend to check back up on. So those were the dot connection moments I had with Denver, but I don't really think it's realistic.
I don't think it's realistic, but this was another of our dark horse teams that we talked about at one point, because they know that they have a reasonably short window here. Like, you just don't know when Joker's playing. He said the other night, "This is the best I've ever played." I mean, that's frightening. Okay, you're talking about a guy who is potentially a 4-time MVP now. Could have been 5. They gave the one to Embiid. He's pretty much him and SGA this year, and he's certainly in the running for it. He just had a ridiculous triple-double. Westbrook has fit with them really nicely, actually, as a starter, even with the lack of spacing, which is a huge surprise right now. And that's worked out pretty well. And Murray has kind of found his game. We saw that against Miami. Looks like he's gotten himself back in shape. The Heat certainly helped with that, but he had 45 a couple nights earlier, and then he had 30 against the Heat. I could see it. I could see Jimmy possibly buying into it. Would they pay him?
No, that's why this
I
is the
don't
one
think
rental.
so. Yeah.
It's the
Yeah.
one rental where Jimmy would just have to say, let's go try to get a ring.
Right. And then there's the whole idea of would he want to go get a ring with a team that denied him of a ring? So would he really get the credit for getting the ring if he's being sort of if he's Joker's? But I could see him in Westbrook clicking. Absolutely. Again, I don't know what the spacing would look like. I think if they're trading Michael Porter Jr., they're going to lose some spacing there. Jimmy's had trouble playing against Denver all these years. It would be kind of funny if he played for them. From the Heat's perspective, you can't pay Michael Porter Jr. what he wants. You can't. Now, so you would essentially be, if that he came the other direction, you'd essentially be renting him too, right? Like that's pretty much what would be happening and clearing that off the cap. There's some of their young players that I think would be interesting in Miami. I think Peyton Watson is a player. He's been up and down, but he has kind of positional size, athleticism, defensive mentality. So I think you could look at some of what they have. I've always thought Denver players would fit well in Miami, just like I thought Bruce Brown would fit well in Miami, KCP would fit well in Miami. Bruce Brown's somebody else that we may be talking about here in the next couple of weeks also. I think it's unlikely, but it's not crazy. It's not crazy. I could see potentially again him being talked into. All right, let's roll with it. My legs are fresh. I've been playing dominoes and pouring coffee. Like, let's go to Denver. I don't know that the altitude would be the best for him, but
he can't act bigger than the Joker. I mean, what are we doing there?
No, no. And I think there would be respect between the two of them. So I definitely think that's a possibility. All right, so you got Memphis, you got Clippers, you got Nuggets. You got one more?
I really don't, honestly. I want to use the last spot to say that I ultimately think that this will be a situation where Phoenix finds a team to take Bradley Beal. Could be Chicago, could be Milwaukee. Those are the two that I would really hone in on. And that's the hope. And that they, in a 4-team, 5-team deal that could include Toronto, Chicago, Milwaukee, Miami, Phoenix, a whole bunch of teams. That's how you get Jimmy to Phoenix, a respectable return back to Miami. And that's probably more likely than any of the dark horses we just talked about. But at least now we've outlined them.
I think you can make an argument that the dark horses that you mentioned, at least two of them, he'd have a better chance to win a title.
No doubt.
Memphis and the Nuggets.
No doubt.
You make an argument about the Clippers. You make an argument about the Clippers, but the problem with the Clippers is that Kawhi's less reliable than KD at this stage. So it's kind of, you're talking about, and Harden in the playoffs, we know is not reliable. Booker's had up and down moments. It's just throwing these kind of mismatched big threes together, and the Heat are not really in that game at this moment, but other teams still are. And so I can see some of these teams jumping at it. If he really wants to win right now, he would go to Memphis. But I do not think that that's what this is about. All right, Greg, appreciate it. We got a couple more podcasts coming up. We're going to talk about who's untouchable, who's not untouchable still on this roster. That's a topic for the weekend. We'll also have a post-game pod after the Nets game. Make sure you subscribe to Off the Floor. Again, just jump on there, pay the $2.99, and away you go. It's like joining a moving train all day long. I'm like, okay, I just throw stuff in there to get people agitated for an hour, and then I come back a little bit later. All right, have a good one.
Thank you for listening to the 5 on the Floor on the 5 Reasons Sports Network. After all, someone needs to listen to my dad.